Beautiful vegans. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Empowered Vegans, the show that inspires and empowers vegans to live their best lives. My name is Mariquita Solis, and please let us know where you're joining from if you're watching us today. And let us know your comments and give StreamYard permission to use your name. I'm excited. I've been very excited about this show because Dr. Lisa Kemmerer is one of my favorite guests. I interviewed her this past year for We Did It Health, and so I'm so honored that she's come back to talk to us again today. So welcome, Dr. Lisa. I see that JJ and Susan are here. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back. Mariquita, I love your name. It's such a beautiful name. And so, yes, I am very happy to be back and very honored. And it's one of my great pleasures to be here too. It's what I love to do with tapestry, right? That's my job. If I'm not doing it, I'm not doing what I love doing. So thank you for making it possible.
Well, I am. Let's jump on in.
All
So I
right.
see people are here. All right. So let's see. Today we're going to talk about informed activism, AMORE. And so that's very interesting because when we think about activism, I see a lot of vegans in different stages of their veganism coming out and really wanting to be activists and not knowing how. Sometimes people are getting very angry and some are very peaceful, or some are not knowing what to do, some are crying, some can't be activists. So we're going to get the scoop now how to really step up our activism game, Dr. Lisa. So go ahead.
Thank
Give us
you.
a
And
scoop.
thank you. And I do actually very much like to be called Lisa or Dr. Lee because my name is not easy. Kemmerer is not an easy thing to say. So I'm good with that. And I also wanted to say, so I'm with Tapestry. Tapestry is the organization that I founded when I retired. And so talks like this are through Tapestry. And it's the work that I do now, giving back and helping educate as I look back on my years of activism. So again, thank you for having me. And today we are going to talk about informed activism. And informed activism is super important, and you get better at activism with time. And I want to start with a story from Tapestry. I have people who call me and they ask for information, and I help them with books, or I help them with um, dissertations, or with projects they're working on for their organizations. And this person called up and we talked for quite a while. And then he said, okay, I've just got to find something out. And he said, all right, so why do you do what you do? I said, compassion. And he said, he looked a little, he was like, hmm. He said, well, what's your core motivation? And I said, compassion. And he said, okay, let's try this again. What are you an activist for? Compassion. And then he said, all right, straight up, why are you vegan? And I said, compassion. So the question is, does anyone out there know what he was looking for? And of course, we don't get to do, it's not easy to do interaction. So I'll tell you, and it wasn't until a year later that I said to him, hey, remember when you asked all those questions? What was it you wanted me to say? And I said, was it animals? And he said, yes. So what I learned from that, what's really interesting about that is in our movement, compassion and animals are one and the same. They are interchangeable. And compassion is a verb. It's a noun in English, but it's a verb. It's something we do. So compassion, passion is like the passion of Christ. It has to do with suffering. With suffering is what the word means. So we do with suffering. We live it and it makes us active. And I think remembering that that's the core of what we're doing is super important to being a good activist. Now, of course, there are different kinds of activism, and there's different kinds of compassion, both. And so when you're being an activist for compassion, you have to say, well, what kind of compassion? What kind of compassion is this going to be like? For example, am I going to do really brave compassion? And again, I'll bet all of you can give me examples of brave compassion from your life. I can tell the story of my sister who was walking around Green Lake in Seattle and saw a bird, a cormorant, caught in a fishing line. And, people were walking by, other people saw it. She went right in the water, clothes and everything. She walked right in. She swam out to the cormorant. And the cormorants are fierce, so she came back with scratches. And, people are walking by. Nobody helped her. She was worried she was going to drown. She has all these clothes on. It's heavy. The bird's feisty. But she freed the bird and she went back to the shore, and both of them survived. And if she hadn't done that, that bird wouldn't have survived. That's, an example of brave compassion, of activism that is brave and courageous on behalf of compassion. What about mainstream compassion, right? So that's something we're all familiar with. That's I'm an animal lover. I have a cat that I love. And meanwhile, they're eating the fish and the chicken and, they'd eat anything that landed on their plates. And they're not really thinking about what it means to be an animal lover or to have deep compassion. And if you look at our movement and you ask, so what is compassion in the movement today? And I think the answer is it's vegan compassion. That's what we're doing. And as an ancient activist, if I look back 30 years ago and I say, well, what was my activism then? Well, it was focused very much on research. And I don't know how many of you can remember 30 years ago, but research, trapping, fur, wildlife, some iconic species. So, and there was some vegetarian stuff going on, definitely. But vegan was not. Vegan activism wasn't a thing. We're getting some feedback here. Thank you. So, okay, then you might ask yourself, so what do we want it to be? We can see what it is now. We can see what it was 30 years ago. What would we like our activism to be in 30 years? And I think that's the really important question. Where are we going? What do we want to be in 30 years? So I want to talk about the book AMORE. And it's one of the most recent publications that I've put out through Tapestry. And it's a book that's written for activists. It's also for educators, and it's also for activists and educators to give to people who wonder why they're vegan. And it covers the 5 main reasons why we go vegan. And what's fascinating is many vegan activists aren't aware of all 5 of them. And I think it's extremely important that we be aware of all 5 reasons to go vegan, because that's what makes us good activists. That's what makes us strong activists. So the A is simple, right? We all know what A stands for. A stands for animal. And of course, I use animal and not animal, because animal is everybody. It's me too, and I'm an activist specifically for other species other than my own, and that's what animal means. Anybody who uses animal, whether it's a chimp or a parrot, it means every species other than my own. So it's not othering, it's not non-humaning. So when you hear me say that, it means all the species other than my own. So it's not something I need to tell all of you much about. We know about the suffering that animals go through because we're eating them, because we're exploiting them. I do often see audiences that have vegetarians in their midst, and they are vegetarians because they don't want to cause the suffering. They don't want to kill animals. So when I'm focusing on the topic of animal, the first one of amore, which is Italian for love, AMORE, the first one, vegetarian, of course, the cows get exploited for their calves. The calves get taken away at birth. The milk gets taken constantly. They're constantly exploited for their mammary glands, for their nursing milk. And it's taken by human beings, and the calves don't get it. And the calves are instead killed for veal. Dairy creates the veal industry. Dairy creates the killing of calves. Never imagine that being a vegetarian is cruelty, has anything to do with not killing. All the dairy products are deeply linked with suffering and killing. And of course, the cows, their baby gets taken away at birth, and they are, for about 6 years, they're perpetually forcibly impregnated, and then they're slaughtered. So to think that dairy doesn't have killing is wrong-headed. And this is one of the things that we need to focus on as activists, because still many people believe that to be a vegetarian, you avoid the killing. And of course you don't. And so many people still don't understand that cows are like us. They don't lactate unless they're pregnant. That milk only comes because they've been forced to produce a young that has been taken from them so that they can produce nursing milk for us. So that's an example of just understanding 2 things: what it is that people don't know, and what it is you need to know to fill that gap, to let them know the cruelty of dairy. And of course, we've done a good job, like things like gestation crates, battery cages. those have been on legislations in California and in the EU. I think battery cages have been banned. So we've been doing a great job. And I think we need to keep it up with things like veal in particular. The next topic, M, stands for medical, and it's one that I ignored roundly in most of my work as an activist. But it is the reason that many people go vegan, and I'm willing to bet there's somebody out there that went vegan for health reasons. So we know that some of the biggest killers from industrialized nations, stroke, heart attack, certain types of cancer, huge killers, that these are absolutely linked to a diet of animal products. So understanding that's really important, because if people don't care about animals, they might well care about their health. And it's a way to bring people to change their diet. And I think when you think about compassion too, and for years I didn't care about health because I was animal based and it was about compassion, and my own health wasn't an issue. My friends started saying to me, you're making a bad vegan. You have to care about your health, because people will, just because they're meat eaters and all get cancer, they're never going to say we got cancer because we're meat eaters. But as soon as you're sick, they're going to tell you it's because you're a vegan. And it's true. So we do have to care about our health, and we do have to be careful. So as vegans, remember to take your vitamins. Always take your daily vitamin. And when you're a woman and you've gone through menopause, make sure that you take calcium. So know what you need. DHA is another thing we ought to take. And if you're still a vegetarian or omnivore, take twice as many, because you're missing out on most of the really good nutrients that plants have. And you're getting too much of some things, which puts imbalances. So do some reading, know what you need. But if you're a vegan, know that you still should just take your daily vitamin, as well as DHA and calcium as you age. So there's another thing to know about compassion and activism and health, the medical side of it. So who else suffers when we don't look after our health? How many of you have watched someone you love get sick, get unhealthy, and perhaps even die young because they didn't go vegan, and you knew they could reverse their diabetes, or you knew they could prevent the heart attack that they eventually had young because of their diet? So remember too that we are responsible for others who care about us, and that when we make these choices that hurt our health, we can tell our parents, you're hurting me when you hurt yourself. And I have to say that my father told my sister and I, he said, the most of his friends had died. He was 86 or 7 when he died. And he said, I've lived this long because you changed my diet. He knew that by going largely vegan, he outlived pretty much all of his friends. And the other thing we have to remember to tell people, people get very worried about the costs of healthcare. So what happens to the costs of healthcare when we're all vegetarians and omnivores? They go up. The triple bypass is common surgery. You don't need it when you're vegan. So we also have a social responsibility to be healthy in our communities, to keep the costs of medical care down, keep insurance costs down, and to be, and in our culture, you're supposed to be productive. And of course, if you're not healthy, you're also not productive. So these are things that we can bring up about the medical side of it, the M of AMORE. The most complicated one is the O, which stands for oppression, but it has to do with human oppressions. So the way I remember this is with the 4 W's. It used to be the 3 W's, but now I've expanded it to the 4 W's. So the first one, let's go with world hunger. So the way we oppress human beings by choosing to be omnivorous or a vegetarian is that we are eating away the grains that could feed the world. So an important statistic to remember is the United States feeds 70% of the grains that we raise to animals. And of course, it's wasted. It goes into, well, it's not wasted in that we're feeding the animals, but we didn't need to breed them, and then they wouldn't exist. And then the 70% of those grains wouldn't have gone to feed chickens and pigs and cows. And this, of course, costs us environmentally in many ways, but we'll get to that. The EU, by the way, feeds 60% of their grains to animals. And if the whole world went vegan, 60% of our lands and 60% of our production, we simply wouldn't need to do it. We have to raise all of this food because we're wasting it by cycling it through animals. And these are large animals. So take a cow, then the dairy cow. Let's go back to dairy. Dairy is especially um, it uses a lot of resources. So if you're going to produce milk, if you're going to produce young, then you're going to need a lot of grain and a lot of water. So 56 pounds of grain a day is what a lactating cow can consume. Isn't that? It's just phenomenal. You can feed a family of 5, I believe it is, for a year in India on the amount of grain a dairy cow eats in 1 week. 1 week versus a year. All right. So again, maybe people don't care about animals. Most people will say that they do care if people are starving, and we're eating in a way that is wasting so many grains that we simply can't feed a hungry world. And these are choices that we make. Another important point to bring up with people who are human-centered is the workers. So when you choose to buy, well, let's say, a chicken, you're going to have to pay someone to raise and kill that chicken. And these jobs are awful, especially slaughtering pigs, slaughtering cows, slaughtering chickens. The lines move so quickly, and they are required to kill and kill and kill and kill and kill. And who wants that job, right? None of us, when we're a child, says, I want to work in a slaughterhouse, right? Wouldn't that be bizarre if we did? And the other thing is that when we're feeding animals, we have to have monocrops. Like this is how you produce so many grains for these huge animals that need so much grain. So those monocultures use a lot of pesticides. Now, again, who's getting those jobs? Who's out there with those deadly pesticides? I know it's not me. It's the marginalized people who end up working in slaughterhouses and dealing with these deadly pesticides. Oftentimes, they don't even speak English if they're in the United States, and they're disempowered. And a great book on this, Slaughterhouse, by Gail Eisnitz. She went there just to write about the animals, but she ended up doing the entire last chapter on the employees and how terribly they were treated, the injuries that they suffered, the training that they didn't receive. The jobs are just toxic and even physically damaging and deadly because they're not trained to use the equipment, and the equipment's very dangerous. So people who aren't concerned about animals, and maybe they're not concerned about their health, but they might be worried about things like eating the food from the hungry, starving children. People are starving every second, the starving. And we can change this cycle, and we decide where people work based on what we buy. So the last 2 W's are the most complicated. So the third one is women. So when you have a culture that exploits reproduction, it affects women. This idea that you are here for me, your reproduction is here for me. And you see this in advertisements, like the sexy pig, like eat me, the eat me pig. It's always a female, right? I'm here for you, take me. This attitude of using females and their reproduction for profit and pleasure of others doesn't just stop with the pig. And ways you can see this, ecofeminism. I love this philosophy because it explains how it is that we this attitude of power over, how it goes from our diet to people. So if you have an attitude that everything out there in the world is for you, and this is what ecofeminists figured out, ecofeminists, the exploitation of the earth and the exploitation of women is connected. In as much as you think the environment is there for you, you think that I am there for you. In as much as you have this idea of producing and reproducing for your profits, you have the same idea and the same attitude towards human being. And this is where the 4th W comes in, because it isn't just women, right? So if you have this idea of production and reproduction, of power over and exploitation, it doesn't just affect the pig and the cow and the chicken and the fish. In the end, it affects human beings as well. It affects how you approach women. And Amy Fitzgerald has done some fantastic studies on this. She actually looked at what happens when a slaughterhouse comes into a community and when people kill all day long, and it raises incidences of domestic violence. So the studies have been done, and they show that it's true. But if you believe that production and reproduction matter, what are you going to think of a gay couple? What about a trans person? Right? Are they productive citizens in the same sense as, are you supposed to have kids so they can go into the military, so they can join the church? I mean, that was the conventional idea. You get warm butts in the pews and you get boots on the ground. Women, especially during war, they'll encourage them to be pregnant and have children. So women for others, our bodies used for ideas and other people's ideas and their wants. So this idea that we're exploiting fish and chickens and pigs and cows for our purposes comes from a bigger attitude that ecofeminists notice. It's an idea of power over, of me using you for my purpose, of I'm more important than you. And when you have that, it affects races, it affects people of different abilities, it affects people with diverse sexualities, and yes, it affects women as well. So that's a complicated one. But once you start to understand that, you can really start to broaden your understanding of your activism and how you approach people with these ideas of why it is that we're vegan and what that means to be vegan. And I, for one, can say that for the first, so I'd say 20 years of my activist life, I did not understand these things. And I was very narrow and very closed-minded. And I, for example, didn't understand racism and how that is linked to other forms of oppression. And so remember as an activist that if you're feeding into sexism, or if you're part of the problem of racism, and you are, unless you really work on it, if you're a white person, and you are, if you're a man and white, and you don't really work on it, you're not going to understand it. And these are things we do have to work on to understand, to broaden our perspective so that we can be the best activists that we can be. So that's a really hard one, a really complicated one. There are 4 areas to know about. There's probably 10, and I've only discovered 4, but give me a little more time, I'll get the others. But the point being, we have to keep working at this understanding of the connections between veganism and larger forms of oppression. And also, please remember, this idea of production, reproduction, it's a bad idea. We're not here to produce, not as women, not as animals. This capitalist idea that the whole world's out there, that the earth is resources, nonsense, it's a tree. So watch your language. Language is really important to new ideas, and I never talk about natural resources. They're not our resources. So making these deeper changes as activists that can help us communicate with the larger world. All right, R isn't one that people never guess. I wish I could ask you if you knew what it was. But, so the R stands for, I'll give you a clue. So Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind and compassionate. I should tell you what the R stands for, religions. So as an activist, if you really want to be a good activist, you need to know about religions. There is no religion that teaches cruelty, right? That's not surprising, really, is it? It's not. It's just not surprising. And yet we don't use this resource. The religions are all out there, filled with ideas that can help us to be activists. And when you have somebody who's devout in their faith, who really believes in what their in their religion and they think that their eternal life, that their next birth is completely dependent on their behavior. So it's super important that we understand religion so that we can be good activists with people of faith. So for example, Genesis teaches, Genesis 1, God created a vegan world. How many Christians know that? Very few. Now, true, you can go on to Genesis 9, and God says, now I give you everything as I gave you the green things and the seeds. Yes, but again, you need to know your scriptures. So Genesis 1, God creates the perfect world, and it's a beautiful world. God says it is very good. And then God says, now I put you out here to caretake, to watch, to look over, to take care of this world as I would do in my stead. That's what Genesis 1 and the beginning of 2 tell us. And then Genesis 6, we find violence. Humans are doing terrible things, and God is unhappy and brings the flood. And then God feels bad, and God says, well, you are what you are. You know, I had hopes. I had high hopes, but now I give you everything as I gave you the seeds and the greens. But the fear of you and the dread of you will be on the earth. and you are responsible for the blood that you shed. You are accountable. So again, knowing these scriptures, and as a teacher, I can tell you it's powerful. And I worked in Montana, conservative population. And unlike the rest of the world who could say, I really don't care. You could say, oh, look at the suffering. And people would say, okay, there it is. I really don't care. I'm busy. Don't bother me. A Christian, a sincere Christian will not say that. They will not say that. So it is a powerful form of activism. All right, so let's look for a minute at Indian religions. So in India, they have the idea of karma and reincarnation. Karma means action. So in reincarnation means that the Atman, or the soul, is reborn in another being based on their actions. So what that means is you and I and my cat who is lying next to me and my dog who is on the other side of me, all of those Atman, we're not just friends now. We have, in the eons and eons and eons, in time unimaginable in the traditions that we come from in Europe, out of Europe and the Judeo-Christian tradition, times unimaginable that go back. All of these souls or Atmans have been in relationship and know one another. So when you eat the cow, when you kill the cow, when you mistreat the cow, you're doing that to someone you know and care about. They may be in a different body. And that's this whole idea of ahimsa. So in Judeo-Christian traditions, we have this idea of love, that we are to be loving. In the Indian traditions, it's not to harm, not ahimsa, harm. So it's a high calling that you cannot harm any form of life. So in India, they have a strong tradition of being vegetarians. And traditions like the Jain tradition, which come out of India, they're very, very strict vegetarians. And now our task is to explain to them the suffering that goes on in dairy. And anyone who is sincere will change their diet. Because back in the day, you did just share the milk from the cow with the baby that lived out back. And that's not the case anymore. So sharing that information to someone who is sincere can change what they eat. They can bring the change that we're looking for. The final one, E, has to do with earth or environment, whichever you choose. The 5 primary, and this is, I think, something I covered in the last talk, the 5 primary environmental problems that we face all stem from diet. And they are, let's see if we can name them. There are climate, so greenhouse gas emissions, freshwater reduction, water pollution, deforestation, and soil degradation. That's all 5. Every one of them, the main contributor is animal agriculture. So let's just look at one of those. So we talked about water last time. How about deforestation? Let's look at a little deforestation just for a moment, just so that we can have some sense of how it is that diet affects deforestation. So why are most of the forests being cut down? And that's the simple question that answers how it is that animal agriculture is implicated. Forests are generally cut down for 2 reasons: grazing, monocrops to feed grazing animals. So there you have it. By having the hundreds of thousands of mouths that we're feeding of chickens and cows and pigs and goats, we have to have some way to feed them. And what we do is we cut down the forest. And of course, deforestation is connected with water retention, and it's connected with greenhouse gas emissions. So the trees, of course, are very important for water retention and for keeping our environment, our air quality clean. And of course, these grains that we're raising, we're cutting the trees down to raise grain, and those grains take water. So, and then the water goes into the animals, and then the animals produce waste, and the waste goes into the water, and the water goes out of the oceans and creates dead zones, and it's killing the frogs, the amphibians, which are very sensitive to pollution, and the fish, which now have secondary sex characteristics because of the hormones coming from the farmed animals, right? So you could go on and on with this. So the important thing about understanding this, and it's all in AMORE, it's all in the book. You read that, you'll have a really strong sense of what you need to know to talk to people about these subjects. So with environment, anyone who is a sincere environmentalist, when you talk to them about animal agriculture, once they're informed, if they're sincere, they will go vegan. Now, if they're not sincere, there's not much you can do. Our job is to inform them. And you kind of, as you age, you get a sense of when you're wasting your time. So it's important to know. Yeah. And, don't pick on your family. Don't pick on your friends. Set an example with them. And as an activist, um, know the information that you need to be informed so that you can bring change. And in closing, let me just say, I started by talking about compassion, the connection between compassion and animal, that our actions are based, for us, compassion is a verb, it's something we do, that there's different types of compassion, like brave compassion and mainstream compassion. And there's also an integrated or expansive compassion. And that expansive compassion, it's informed. So when you are an informed activist with expansive compassion, that is the way that you will be the most effective as an activist. With that, I open it up for discussion.
Wow. Okay. I don't even know where to begin here. Let's look at some of the comments. That was amazing. And it's very thought provoking. All these, I mean, the way it expands out into all areas. I mean, it has to. How could we not see that? Everything is connected. So how could, when we're poisoning the earth, I mean, when we're eating like this, poisoning the earth, we're poisoning everyone. Everyone suffers. So, let's look at some of these comments. We've got, well, Cassandra's here and she's saying, hello, everyone. And she's saying, eating animal products is responsible for world hunger. Egoist people don't even care. Right? Yeah. I'm not hearing you, but are you, I don't know if it's me or.
Let's try that. Now am I back?
Oh, there we go.
Am I back?
Yeah,
I hit the button. Yeah. Sorry. So
Okay,
yes, no, it's not that they don't care. It's that they don't know. And that's our job, is to inform them. And sure, there are some people who don't care. But this information that we've talked about, AMORE, by the way, it's about $10. It's easy to get online. Just go to lisakemmerer.com, go to publications. It's right there. But if you give them this information, then you can say egoist people who don't care. Or what you could probably say is, you say you care about people, but you really don't. You say you care about the earth, but you really don't. And I think that you can say that to people who have this information. But again, be careful. Remember, it takes time to change. I doubt that any of us here were born vegan. We've all taken a path to get here, especially back when I was young. Vegans, it was pretty much unheard of. And there's a path you take. There's knowledge you take on. It's a process. So be patient with others and have a sense of goodwill with them as an activist, that if you give them the right information, they do care. But nothing happens that fast for most people. And people are all different. Tom Reagan wrote about this. He said there's 3 types of people. There's ones who change immediately. There's those who change slowly. He called them muddlers, and that's probably most people. And there's those born with that sensitivity. So just know that people are all different, and our job is to inform, not to judge, and not to turn people against veganism by showing that we really aren't as compassionate as we are trying to be, but to be compassionate and be understanding and be patient. And for me, patience is it's a lifelong struggle. So I can understand it.
Right. Yes, it is. I mean, it can be hard. Shanacy's saying, don't forget there's a big distinction between a vegan diet and a whole food plant-based diet.
Yes, and that's where understanding the environment comes in. In fact, I meant to mention that. As informed activists, it's very important that we not just, like I mentioned, that we can't be racist and we can't be sexist, but we also need to eat foods that are sensitive to the earth. We can't be we shouldn't be eating this highly packaged, highly processed vegan foods. And I don't think of it because I don't eat them, but I was a vegan, long before any of these foods came up. So my diet's simple because that's pretty much how I learned to eat vegan. But nowadays we have all these horrible options. Don't buy these horrible options. Try to buy locally where you can. Try to support local foods. Try to stay away from pesticides. But I do understand that it all costs more to go organic. But there's so many things you can buy, like big packages of dried red beans or black beans. And, there are ways to find a balance between the high processed foods and stuff that's crazy expensive. So I understand that too. But we do need to change how we live to set an example that we are not the narrow animal activists of the 1980s or the 90s, that we're starting to figure out that there are other concerns / issues that we have to work with, not against them, but we work with. All the causes that are out there are important, every last one of them. And while we don't need to be an advocate for every cause, because it's simply not possible, we do need to not work against those other causes. And this is what I used to tell. I had a Christian friend that I knew when I was teaching, and I said to her, look, I may not be an activist for what you're an activist for, but I do everything I can whenever I can. I'm on board. But you work against my cause. You're specifically doing things that are cruel and causing the death. And I think that's something that we need to be able to say to people. I'm on board with you. What can I do to help you? I'm going to be an activist for my cause, whatever it is. And for me, it is, whatever it is. And for you, it's going to be whatever it is. But we need to not work against other activists. Be on board, be sensitive, watch our language, and make choices that show that we're on board.
Well, you could use that in the case of people that work at the shelters, right? Animal shelters. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people say, well, shoot, you don't care about animals, right? You say you do. That's heard a lot, right? You don't really like animals.
You like your cat.
Right.
Yes, that's right. And again, we have to not be judgmental. Our task is to say, hey, did you know? Drop comments like, oh, did you see that pig? Did you see how, the pig was afraid of see how curious it was, to try to help them to see. Did you see how much like my cat that the dog was? That dog is so much like that cow, and that cow is so much like that chicken, and they all have the same feelings. And did you know what happens to them in the industry? Positive. We have to try to be positive, and it is hard.
It's very hard. You're right. So I'm sure we all can agree. So we got another comment here from Cassandra. In non-Hindu traditions, they ignore the term of Paramatma, the divine in every living entity, Atma, Atma, soul, Paramatma, super soul of the divine.
Paramatma. Yes, and it is so true that the Indian traditions every tradition is beautiful. I have to be very careful. They're all beautiful. Everyone, the Chinese religions, the Indian religions, and the Judeo-Christians. And the Judeo-Christian traditions in Islam, they get kind of a bad rap. But that's because the dominant, horrible culture that we all come from, it comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. So that's why they've got the bad rap. And the Indian traditions, they're following in the footsteps a lot with capitalism, but they have all of them have an absolutely beautiful core. And look at the Native American traditions, how those focus on, again, that same sense of the divine in all beings, that the namaste, I greet the divine in you, and that is such a beautiful idea. Okay, so I'm working on a website. It's called animalsandreligion.org or .com, and I have Judaism up. Christianity's ready to go. I just have to get the funding to make it all happen. I'm going to do the Indian traditions. They're all going to be up there. And the idea is that they will be there free of charge. Anyone, any activist, any educator, anyone who's in religion and wants to know about their religion and animals can go to that website and get that information, because I know the power of religions to bring change. And they'll each have a book with them. Both Animals and Judaism and Animals and Christianity are out. They're up. They're on that publication, lisakemmerer.com, under publications. They're both there. So, yes, the Indian religions, thank you for calling attention to a really beautiful idea in the Indian religious traditions. Right now, the only book I have out that covers the Indian religious traditions is Animals and World Religions, Oxford 2012. It's the only book out there that systematically covers each of the religions and what it says about how we ought to treat animals. Hi, Kitty.
Well, that is very interesting, because in my coaching, I'm focusing on bringing the animals in as teachers, right? And really looking to the Native American traditions for those stories. So it's
Mhm.
beautiful, definitely. I'm excited about everything you're doing. Go ahead.
Mariquita, be sure, don't neglect the Judeo-Christian traditions because we come from that culture and they do get a bad rap, and there's so much of beauty. I can get you a copy of Animals and Christianity if that would be helpful for you. I'd be happy to send that to you so that you can share that information with people. Let me know, please.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely, definitely. Because again, I'm the leader of the animal ministry, which probably a lot of people know, into my church in North, really, in like, sure, pets, but all animals, not just pets. So,
Yes, that's right.
and so,
Yes, the
so
Chinese
now we've got
religions
a
and the
comment.
Japanese religions. Absolutely true. I see that comment and it's absolutely true. And Confucianism also, it is the harder to find the animal friendly parts, but it also has them. But Taoism is just absolutely fabulously beautiful in its treatment of animals, and Shinto as well. They're core. Animals are core. And that again, that idea of the of harmony is really important. The idea that of unity, that they all come from the same place, those are really strong parts of those traditions. I'm so happy that people out there are aware of these things. It's a beautiful thing. Good for you, and thank you, both of you.
It is beautiful. Yes, I know. It's amazing. And I think it's powerful when we explore these religions. And it's hard. I mean, like, it's we have to look at our own prejudices, like you're saying, like, how, I mean, for me, growing up in the Catholic Church, I
Yeah.
feel very tense when I think about, like, I had to go to confession, and gosh, I hated that, right? And I
Yeah.
have to get through that to really
Yes.
explore and to see other things, and to be able to connect. I mean, I have to open myself up to be able to connect with someone who's Catholic, right? I can't just say, wow, I hated that church, you know.
No, that's
To
right.
be
That's
right,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
good for you.
definitely.
And of course, the Catholic Church has all those saints and some really beautiful teachings on some of the art with animals in it. So it's got some wonderful things going for it. And the Pope
Right,
now
St.
too is,
Francis. Right.
yes, showing some sensitivity. Wow. Who knew, right?
Amazing. I know. You're right. You're right. So yeah, it's getting over these ideas that have holding us back from communicating effectively from other people. And like you're saying, compassion for all beings,
Yes, that's
is
right.
the key.
As well as ourselves.
Right. Yes. Self-compassion. Exactly. And so because I understand, I read somewhere that Confucius was encouraging animal sacrifice. What about that?
Well, it is, as I say, that's from my experience, that's the hardest one. But remember that the Confucian tradition lives with Taoism. They're the yin and the yang of China in the sense that they're both very very important to the people. So the Confucian tradition deals with human relations. Here, Kitty, you batted me. So remember, so remember that you can't just take the Confucian tradition alone. It has to be seen in the context of Taoism, and Taoism really brings in that side, the earth-friendly side. Whereas the Confucian tradition is human-focused, and the rites, sacrifice were extremely important. The rituals of the Confucian era, so an animal sacrifice was definitely part of that. No getting around it. But that's like focusing on Genesis 9, right? That's just going straight to the one thing you can find where they could say, look, it says I can do this. Let me say this. You could point to either the Old Testament, Hebrew scriptures, which are important to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but especially Judaism and Christianity. Or you can point to the Confucian tradition, and you could say, or you can point to the Hindu tradition. There's sacrifice there too. But to do that is to really, really miss the bigger beauty of Confucianism, where it teaches benevolence as an absolutely core ethic. Benevolence, very important. And remember this, that to try to argue that sacrifices, ancient sacrifices to the gods, have anything to do with us slapping a piece of meat on our plate today is clearly a stretch of the imagination. So even if Confucius did say sacrifice is fine, and even though the Old Testament does definitely say it, even though it says the newer prophets say no, and it's very clear, it says, the blood of your sacrifice I'm not interested in that. I own everything. I own every cow of the field. Take care of the widow. Feed the orphan child. So the Old Testament scriptures are very clear on this. Confucian tradition, same thing, very clear. Benevolence is the core virtue. It's the core behavior. And so while you can make an argument that at some point these were acceptable, and you could make an argument that those rituals are somehow, they still have a place. The scriptures do not conclusively say that it never was a good thing and never can be a good thing. But they are very clear that there are preferred ways of behavior. And again, no matter what they say, it has nothing to do with what people are eating today.
Well, you're right. We're not living in those times. That's a whole different era. I mean, that's a whole different ball game. All right, so let's look at some more comments here. Again, there's a book, 300 Vegetarian Saints at Earlier
Ooh.
Times. So it's not. I'll have to look that up.
Ooh, me too. Wish it was vegan. Maybe someday.
Right. Cows die. I've never heard of cow.
I love this knowledge that people are having, though, of religions. It's a beautiful thing.
I do too. I do too. I've got to look it up. I mean, look all this up afterwards. The
Kung Fu is purely vegan.
Purely vegan.
The Taoist traditions in particular have very strong vegan. I have to be careful, but yes, vegan roots, because whereas dairy is a problem in India because it's part of their culture and it didn't used to be cruel, and now it is. China didn't do dairy. So all the traditions from Northern Asia don't have that problem. Eggs is more likely to be what they're going to slip in, but generally no, they are vegan. When they're doing their Taoism right, it's vegan at its core.
Well, when you talk about India, I think about, how their health is just terrible because of the dairy. I know that their country, the people in their country are suffering terribly due to that high dairy consumption, which is very, very sad.
Yes, and sweets as well. And we're not helping any by getting our Western bad habits over there, or I shouldn't say Western, west of what? Our Greco-European diaspora bad habits.
Gosh, yes, I know. And we're trapped in this cycle of seeing blindly. Like this is, the cycle of it's normal to be sick when you get older, right? So it's very sad.
It is not. No, that's right. My mother was very healthy right up to 93 years old.
Oh, wow.
It's not that difficult. Eat well, get your exercise, take your vitamins, and then work too on mental, on peace and happiness internal.
Exactly. Yes.
What about some activist questions out there? Looking for some activist questions out there. Author of the book is Dr. Oh, thank you.
That's the 300. Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, I have some questions because I don't see any over here in the chat. So what about it? People that do say, well, I can't give up cheese. I don't even know how to do that. Should we even, if someone's saying, what about if they say, I'm never going to be vegan? Would you just walk away, or what would you respond to that? I could never be. What would you say to, I could never be vegan?
I understand that. It seems very daunting. And then I would do two things. I'd say, why don't you come over for a meal? And I'd say, can we go shopping? Those are the two things I would do. So my friend Jo here, I never talked to her about being a vegan, never. But sometimes things would come up and she'd probably hear me flame on about some form of cruelty or something. And, so she got these kind of side views and I'd also complain about sexism, and I'd see that with, the connections, and I'd talk, but she's interested in ideas. Then one day she said to me, I just don't know if I can do without cheese. And I'm like, I didn't know you were even vegetarian. So she had made that transition just by noticing, by paying attention, and then looking some things up. And I said, let's go shopping. And we brought home every alternative cheese that I knew of that didn't taste awful. And, many of them are really good now. And she's not just a vegan, she's a happy vegan. And she says that all the time. I'm a happy vegan. She loves the vegan food. So there's somebody who said she could never let cheese off, but she, of course, didn't know about vegan cheeses. And, there are some people who just, if they truly say, I can never leave cheese off, it isn't about going vegan. It's something else, right? The vegan cheeses are delicious. If you have compassion, if you sincerely care about any of these topics, AMORE topics I brought up, then whatever slight changes you have to deal with from choosing a different kind of cheese that's vegan, you really aren't interested if you can't make that change. And again, I don't know if there's a point at which you say that to someone. There probably is, but certainly not right away. Give them a chance. But, at some point you have to call them out. You really don't care about the things that you really don't care about the earth. You really don't care about world hunger. You really don't care about the fact that you're eating all the grains and while other people are starving. Because if you did, that slight change in the taste of cheese going from, this, you can't find anything you like, you're just not interested. And I think there is a point at which you do say that to someone.
Well, are you surrounded by a lot of environmentalists that are eating meat?
I'm not surrounded by anybody. I live in splendid isolation. but the world that I live in, I'm not even surrounded by activists of any kind. But I do bump into some people who say they're environmentalists, and I can guarantee you they're not vegan. Other than my friend Joe. Yeah, I don't know any vegans in the area. Not a single one. Just Joe, my friend who became vegan recently.
That's a blessing, though, to hear that story. So when you go out, let's just say you're meeting someone new. How do you tell, like they always say, if somebody's vegan, we always know it, right? Do you say anything, or how does that go about?
Well, I would say a couple of things. And for me, I don't go, I wouldn't bring it up with a neighbor unless I had to. I just wouldn't. And that is why they say that about vegans. We do bring it up. We watch for our opening and we jump in like with delight and glee, which is okay. It can be okay. But, I would say that obviously for me, it's speaking, it's writing, it's educating, that I do my activism not with my neighbor, who I can guarantee you isn't interested, but with people who may be interested. And I think that you can and should do this with people around you. But here is the main thing I will say, and this is why AMORE is so important to me. Know who they are. So if I were going to do activism with my neighbor, they're strongly Christian. They go to church. I know I'll be using the R, and I'll be talking to them, and I do. So I've already made those inroads with them, talked about dogs and cats. You start gentle. And then, we have stray cats in the area. So for these people, just getting them to spay neuter, right? It's ground zero where I live. It's rural. So, I'm not going to jump into vegan. I'm going to try to get them. Can we get that cat spayed or neutered? That's going to be where I'm at. That cat that's out there, I've got a trap out there trying to catch a cat that's limping. Nobody else would do anything for that cat. So trying to get them to see there's something that we can do, and we are responsible. So taking people where they're at. And in my particular community, vegan's off the table. I'm so far from that. It's just, it's why I never would have brought it up with Joe. She had to figure that out on her own, just because she's interested in ideas and because she's listening and sensitive and because she's a Christian who actually cares about what Scripture says and cares about being compassionate. So again, the most important thing here when you're doing activism, know who you are talking to. Now, if you're meeting a stranger and you're just making a comment in a store, that's one thing. But know who you're talking to, know which of the 5 things is going to be the best inroad to get them to understand so that they can come in the door and then they can find out the other reasons. Don't start with animal suffering with pretty much anyone. That's generally not the best choice. I mean, if you do, you need to know which angle to take it from in religion. That's the best way if you're going to bring in suffering.
I think you're right, because when I look at it, I'm sure you're right, but when I think about my own friends, they just kind of laugh, about the animals, and it's not really important to them, oh yeah, haha about the pig, or haha about the cow, right?
Yeah.
And it's just
don't hurt yourself, don't exhaust yourself. And the other thing is that if you are at a table with friends and they do ask about the vegan diet, make sure you say to them, you just asked me about my vegan diet. Do you want me to answer that question? And make them own it. Because if you don't, later they're going to say, there you are again talking about veganism. And they're not going to remember that they asked. They're just going to blame you because they really don't want to hear what it is you're talking about. Make them own it. Make them say, yes, I really do want to hear it, and then answer their question. That's my suggestion. And boy, is that from experience.
Yeah, it's a very delicate situation. So, how long have you been vegan? How did that even happen? I usually ask that in the beginning.
Yeah, well, it is hard for me to answer that. 40, 45 years, I'm not even really sure because vegan wasn't a thing. And, I remember that my sister gave me a flyer from PETA on a downed cow. So vegetarian came first. And then as I started to learn, it wasn't long. It was like just a snowball effect as I learned more. And the other thing is that in those days, 40 years ago, going vegan, now to go vegan, some people say you can't buy products from a company that isn't vegan, right? This is a whole nother level. Back then, if the 40th ingredient was whey, it was questionable whether or not you'd know whey was a dairy product, right? Because this stuff, it was all a process of learning, and it started with, I was there when it was starting. So there wasn't a really clear time when I say, oh, I'm going vegan and I can now buy all this list of nice vegan products that are over here. You just gave stuff up. There was no milk for vegans. It was so, oh, you can't imagine the bad taste of what they did have. No one drank it, right? So you did without. You did without cheese. You did without ice cream. You just did without. You ate simply. So it's a hard question for me to answer because now going vegan is something very clear, and you do it pretty, go vegan and you're done.
Now, I understand that because the same thing for me. I went vegetarian in 95. And then when did I go vegan? Well, my journey was very like this too, vegan, vegetarian, vegan, right? And people are like, how could you do that? Well, how could I do it? Because I'm a human being and I'm not perfect.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
That's it. So
yes, judgmental. And it's another thing about our movement. We just need to celebrate somebody who goes vegetarian and talk to them about the suffering of the animals and be, you've got someone there who cares. You don't want to turn them off. You want to bring them along. And again, the way to do that is, as you said, to remember your own path, that it's usually by fits and starts, and you can say, oh no, I went vegan and that was that. And to some extent that's true of me. It's just that so long ago that there was no going vegan like there is now. But I can't begin to say that because going vegan means you understand racism. I was decades from understanding racism and ableism, and the trans issue wasn't, that's very recent. And I didn't get the connections with homophobia. And while I can quickly say I wasn't homophobic and I wasn't racist, if you don't know about it, you are. So, as I say, going vegan now means something very different, at least from my understanding of it now, as somebody who is in it up to my neck and is an educator, that there's just a lot to understand. And so there is no room for arrogance. There is only room for us to explore, expand, and express the compassion that is at the core of all that we do.
Yes, and you're right. I mean, from me, to let that go out in every cell of my body to every living being on earth, and to see the connection with every living being, and not let any living being be excluded from that. Definitely. So look, I see that we've got some beautiful comments and we're coming up on the end of the hour, but living in isolation is great. This is boosting intelligence and empathy from Cassandra. And I love how this is Angela Fischetti, and she's saying, I completely relate to Lisa regarding how to eat simply.
Good
and
for you.
she's helping elderly or a little bit older people. I mean, you can thrive at any age, and Angela's showing that. So
I didn't mention ageism. It should be right in there with all the others, right? This whole idea of production, reproduction, and age. And so with animals, as the age, kill them, don't let them get old. So don't think that doesn't. We have a culture that hates aging and hates older people, and this is all part of the package of what we're buying into. By going vegan, we need to understand those connections and speak strongly and love age. Age is a beautiful thing.
I love this. You're going to have to come back. Definitely. I'm going to have to go study both of these live streams. I was studying the other one yesterday, but it's so powerful. Everything you say and your wisdom is amazing, and we're touching everything here.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure for me.
Well, tell us again where we can find you and get the $10 book.
LisaKemmerer.com. Click on publications. And I try to make everything that's in there. This book, AMORE, I will put it online as soon as I get the money together. So the Christianity and AMORE both need to go up. So it's called Vegan Ethics AMORE. LisaKemmerer.com. Click on publications. You can also click on Tapestry if you want to know what Tapestry does. And everything we do is free. All you have to do is call on me, as it were. So yeah, it's all good. I love doing what I do. But that's where you go, LisaKemmerer.com, publications, and you'll find the Christianity book is up there, the Judaism book is up there, the AMORE book is up there, and they will all eventually be free online.
Wow. Okay, we're all headed there. I'm super excited about this and very inspired to see how, again, every single thing is connected, every single being. So thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Lisa. And
my pleasure.
And thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Happy vegans.
Yeah, namaste vegan.